Now NTSB air traffic control investigator Bill English explores another scenario.
When we first heard about the accident, it looked like there might be the possibility that we'd want to look at a wake turbulence encounter.
The wings of a fast-moving jet disturb the air around them, creating a trail of violently swirling air. NASA tests decades earlier had illustrated the power and danger of wake turbulence to other planes.
We had to see, did another airplane depart before it? That's where wake turbulence hazard would come from. And we wanted to look at what kind of airplane departed ahead of it. Larger, heavier airplanes are the more risky wake turbulence creating airplanes.
Bill English examines radar records from the time of the accident. He learns that a much heavier Bombardier regional jet, a CRJ, took off moments before the beach.
The CRJ sure is a good-looking plane, isn't it?
Yeah, wish I was flying it.
The wake turbulence is generated from the wingtips of any airplane. As soon as it starts to lift off the ground, it makes what people sometimes call horizontal tornadoes, vortexes of air that can create hazardous turbulence.
Runway 18 right. Taxi into position.
Air traffic controllers do have standard procedures for spacing out airplanes so that they have a chance to avoid the wake turbulence or let the wake dissipate.
One year earlier, an American Airlines jet taking off from New York encountered wake turbulence. The plane crashed into a residential neighborhood. 260 people on the plane and 5 people on the ground were killed.
You're gonna blast us with his jet blast.
Air Midwest
5481.
cleared for takeoff.
Air traffic investigator Bill English must now determine if wake turbulence from the CRJ caused Flight 5481 to crash. Bill English studies the flight path of Captain Leslie's plane and finds it consistent with a plane flying into wake turbulence.
A pitch up is not unheard of in a wake turbulence encounter where the airplane will suddenly go nose up and the crew has trouble to counter that and get the nose back where it belongs.
English needs to know how close the Air Midwest flight got to the larger jet. The Charlotte Tower has a sophisticated computer system that tracks the movement of planes while they're still on the ground. The system gave Bill English his answer.
That system had a very rapid update, so we could see exactly where on the runway and at what time the regional jet lifted off compared to when the accident airplane started its roll.
When Bill English plots the precise position of the planes at liftoff, he makes a telling discovery. Even though both planes used the same runway, their paths never crossed.
The RJ started lifting off much farther down the runway than the accident airplane did, and the climb-out angle of the regional jet and the climb-out angle of the accident airplane never intersected. The angle of the accident airplane was very steep. It really had no possibility of intersecting the wake turbulence from the regional jet. So if our airplane lifted off and climbed above the angle of the previous airplane, we knew then that it couldn't possibly be a factor.
The wake vortex theory is ruled out, and Bill English's work is done. Now it's up to Ward and her crew to find clues in the burnt-out wreckage of the plane. Within 2 days, her investigation will reveal a string of errors and faulty assumptions that has been putting tens of thousands of passengers at risk for years. Within hours of the crash, investigators find the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder from Air Midwest Flight 5481. The recorders are designed to withstand temperatures of up to 1100 degrees Celsius. In this crash, parts of the voice recorder had actually melted. The devices are photographed and sent for analysis. Then, amongst the tons of debris on the ground, investigators discover the shredded remains of the elevator control cables. Vital to flight control, these cables link the pilot's control columns to the flight elevator, an aerodynamic panel that helps pilots climb and descend. Turnbuckles keep the cables taut. To climb, pilots pull on the column. The cables pull the elevator up, forcing the nose to rise. To descend, pilots push on the control column. The cables tilt the elevator down, and the nose falls. But as investigators examined the burnt-out cables and turnbuckles on Captain Leslie's plane, already something looks wrong.
They looked unusual. They weren't in like the normal position that you would find them. In this case, we had one adjusted all the way out, and then one adjusted all the way in. So those were set aside for us to look at later.
While the lab work continues, NTSB investigator Stephen Carbone travels to Huntington, Virginia. He interviews mechanics who worked on the plane the day before the crash.
At the time, we had known that it had just come out of a detail check, which is a routine check. And knowing that, we were looking into the possibility that something had been done during the check that needed to be looked at from an investigation point of view.
The cables needed servicing. My guy wrote up a service order, and I put them on it. Don't forget the manual.
Got it.
Every 1,200 flight hours, Air Midwest planes go in for routine maintenance work. This includes adjusting the cables that control the plane's elevator.
In the process of doing this check, he found that the mechanic had found that the cables were out of limits. So he had written up that he was going to check the cable tensions and then adjust them as per the manual.
Everything's ready?
The mechanics tell Carbone that the work was checked and stamped for quality assurance.
They believe that the aircraft was properly rigged as per the manual.
At first glance, that belief appears to be right. After maintenance, this Beech aircraft took off and landed 9 times without incident before Captain Leslie took the helm. Investigators turned to the flight data recorder to learn what happened on those flights. The flight data recorder stores data from numerous flights, both before and after the plane's cables were adjusted. No one on any of those flights had encountered any problems with the plane's elevator.
So at the time, we didn't know how that affected the airplane because it had flown 9 times successfully before the accident flight.
Ward also discovers that the crew tested their elevator controls before Flight 5481 took off.
Flight controls, free and correct.
Air Midwest 5481.
Ward and her team dig deeper, looking to discover if the unusual configuration of the elevator cables could have played a role in this crash. What they find strikes at the very heart of what went wrong. Normally, both turnbuckles are almost exactly the same length. But on Captain Leslie's plane, one turnbuckle is noticeably longer than the other. To establish the correct cable tension, mechanics tighten the turnbuckles. But too much tightening of a turnbuckle shortens the cables and cuts the range of motion of the elevator control. The elevator should be able to tilt to a nose-down position of 14 degrees. But their downward range has actually been cut in half to only 7 degrees. The result is deadly. As the flight got underway, the nose pitched up as expected during takeoff.
What?
Push the nose down! Oh my God!
But the reduced range in the elevator made it impossible for the pilots to bring the nose down again.
Due to the adjustment that had been done in the maintenance a few nights earlier, there was nothing that the crew could have done at that time.